was the fall of 1997 when my mom and I moved into a quiet neighborhood in a small Oregon town. I was 15 at the time and honestly, more annoyed about leaving my school and friends behind than excited about our fresh start. My mom had just gone through a rough divorce, and the house we moved into was cheap, too cheap actually. But it was what we could afford and it was better than nothing. The street was lined with nearly identical one-story homes, the kind with cracked driveways and front lawns that ranged from perfect to post-apocalyptic. Our new place was right in the middle. Across the street was a white house with faded blue shutters and an overgrown yard. The grass looked like it hadn't been cut in months, and there were dead leaves piled high near the porch. I noticed an old man standing in the window watching us move in. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. Just stood there, silent. That was the first time I saw Charlie. We didn't know his name at the time. No one introduced themselves. In fact, the whole street seemed weirdly quiet, like people avoided each other on purpose. My mom said maybe folks were just private here. I wasn't so sure. Over the next few days, I noticed Charlie's routine. Every morning, just after sunrise, he would come out onto his porch, sit in an old wooden rocking chair and stare into the street. He never spoke to anyone, just rocked slowly, with this faraway look in his eyes like he was remembering something he wished he could forget. Sometimes at night, I'd peek out my window and see him standing in his yard doing nothing, just staring at the ground. Once, I swear I saw him holding a shovel, but when I looked again, he was gone. About a week after we moved in, my mom tried to say hi to him. She waved across the street while checking the mailbox. Charlie just turned around and went back inside. One evening, I overheard my mom talking to a neighbor 2 houses down. The woman whispered like she didn't want anyone to hear. That old man, Charlie, used to have a son. Little boy, disappeared years ago. Cops never found him. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Something about Charlie's eyes made more sense after that. I started watching him more closely. Every move, every shadow. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of something I'll never forget. Something that still wakes me up at night. Something that should have stayed buried. It was late October when I first saw him digging. I'd just finished a history paper and was up later than usual. The house was silent, except for the ticking clock in the kitchen and the faint hum of the refrigerator. As I went to close the blinds in my room, something outside caught my eye. Charlie was in his backyard. He stood near the edge of his fence facing away from me, wearing an old brown coat and holding a shovel. He wasn't just standing there, he was digging, slowly, methodically. The ground must have been cold and hard, but that didn't seem to matter to him. He just kept digging like he had all the time in the world. I watched for maybe 10 minutes, then 15. He never stopped, never looked up. The hole was getting deeper. At first, I thought maybe he was just a weird old guy with some hobby I didn't understand. Maybe gardening, maybe he lost something. But then he kept going. And then I saw something I still can't explain. He paused, leaning on the shovel, and turned his head just slightly toward my direction. Not fully, just enough to let me know he saw me watching. I ducked immediately behind my blinds and waited. I don't know why I was scared, but I was. Something about his movements felt wrong. Not crazy, not wild, but too calm, too deliberate. The next morning I looked out into his yard. The hole was gone, filled in. The dirt looked freshly packed, darker than the rest of the lawn. That same day I caught him again, this time in broad daylight, standing in his yard, staring at that patch of dirt. Just staring. That night I stayed up again. At exactly 2:15 in the morning, the porch light across the street flicked on. I got to my window just in time to see Charlie dragging something across the yard. A large lumpy black trash bag. He stopped at the same spot, the same hole. He started digging again. I wanted to scream, to call someone, but I froze. There was something paralyzing about it all, like I wasn't just watching something creepy, but something deeply wrong. The digging stopped after about 20 minutes. Then without a sound, Charlie stood up, placed the shovel against the wall of his shed, and walked back into his house like nothing happened. The next morning, the yard looked perfect again. I tried to tell my mom. She half listened while pouring coffee and getting ready for work. Maybe he's just burying trash, she said, brushing me off. Some people do weird things. Doesn't mean he's dangerous. But I knew what I saw, and it wasn't trash. A few days passed, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I saw. Charlie didn't come out during the day anymore, only at night, and only to dig. I stopped sleeping properly. My eyes were bloodshot from staying up, watching him from behind the blinds like some paranoid stalker. But I couldn't help it. Something inside me kept whispering, "You saw a body." It was around that time that I decided to ask questions. I went to the house 3 doors down, where the woman my mom had spoken to lived. Her name was Mrs. Tully, a widow in her 70s who always sat on her porch with a tabby cat in her lap. She looked surprised when I asked about Charlie. "You don't want to get involved with that one," she said, almost without emotion. I told her I just wanted to know if it was true, if he really had a son who went missing. She didn't answer right away, just looked off into the distance. "His name was Kevin," she said finally. "About 6 or 7, I think. Real quiet, sweet kid. Used to ride his little blue bike up and down the sidewalk. Then one day, he was gone. That was, must be 15 years ago now. Was there a search?" "A big one," she said. "Police were everywhere, dogs, helicopters, the whole neighborhood. Turned out to help. But nothing. No bike, no shoes, not even a footprint." She lowered her voice. "People talked, said maybe Charlie snapped. His wife had passed the year before. He wasn't, well, you know." I nodded slowly, heart pounding in my chest. "But no evidence," she continued. "Nothing to charge him with. So eventually they just moved on, like people do. Moved on, but Charlie didn't. That was clear now. Back at home, I went online and searched everything I could. I found a short article archived from an old local paper. Headline read, "Boy 6, missing from Oak Ridge Street, no leads after 2 weeks." There was a black and white photo of a pale little boy in a dinosaur shirt. He looked nervous even in the picture. That night I saw Charlie again, standing in the yard facing the same spot. But this time he wasn't alone. There was something else out there. A shape, kneeling by the dirt. At first I thought it was an animal. Then it turned its head and I saw a face. Pale, small, wide-eyed, like it was made of mist or memory. And then, just like that, it was gone. Charlie didn't move, didn't flinch. Just stood there like he expected it, like it was routine. That's when I stopped wondering if I was just imagining things, and started wondering if Charlie had ever stopped digging, or if he'd just been waiting for someone to notice. I couldn't take it anymore. The dreams, the whispers, the digging. I had to know what Charlie was burying in that yard. I needed proof, or at least someone else to see what I was seeing. So I told Aaron. Aaron lived 2 houses down and went to my school. We weren't exactly close friends, but he was the kind of kid who lived for weird stuff, urban legends, ghost videos, conspiracy theories. When I told him about Charlie, he didn't laugh. He said, "Let's watch him." It was a Friday night when we finally did it. We camped in my room with snacks, binoculars, and my mom's old camcorder. The lights stayed off. Curtains barely cracked open. The clock ticked past midnight. At 2 o'clock, nothing. At 2:15, the porch light flicked on. There he was. Charlie stepped out slowly, shovel in one hand, something bundled in a thick tarp in the other. We both froze. "Holy crap," Aaron whispered. "He's doing it again." The way Charlie moved was unnerving. Like a machine stuck in a loop. No rush, no hesitation. Just digging. Always digging. After 20 minutes, he dropped the tarp into the hole. Then he stood still for a long time like he was praying or remembering. Then he filled it in, packed the dirt, and disappeared into the house. We got it all on tape. The next day, we snuck into his yard. It was early, around 7 in the morning. The neighborhood was quiet, fog clinging to the grass like smoke. I was shaking, heart hammering in my chest. Aaron carried a small camping spade. We reached the spot and began to dig just a few inches, just enough. And then we hit something. It wasn't a bone. It wasn't a body. It was a small plastic dinosaur. Broken, dirty, green. Aaron looked at me, pale as a ghost. "That's his kids," he muttered. "That's gotta be his kids." We buried it back quickly and ran. Later that night, I tried to tell my mom again. She brushed it off until I showed her the tape. The footage wasn't perfect. It was grainy and dark, but you could clearly see Charlie. The tarp and the digging. She sat silent for a long time after watching. Finally, she said, "We'll call someone tomorrow." But tomorrow never came, because that night Charlie didn't dig. He came to our door, At 3 o'clock in the morning, there was a knock, soft, slow, deliberate. I froze in bed. My mom stepped into the hallway. She didn't open the door, just stood there, looking through the peephole. Then she locked every bolt and whispered, "Don't ever talk to that man again." I asked what she saw. She didn't answer, but I could tell she had seen something she wasn't ready to admit. After that night, my mom changed. She didn't say anything more about the video, didn't call the police like she promised. She just shut down, started locking all the doors, even during the day, kept the curtains drawn. She even moved my bed away from the window. When I asked why, she just said, "Because I need you safe." But I wasn't. Neither of us were. A few days later, Charlie's house went completely dark. No porch light, no movement, nothing. The shovel was still leaning against the side of his shed, but Charlie was gone. For 2 nights, I waited at my window. Nothing. On the 3rd night, I called the police myself. I told them everything. The digging, the tarp, the video. They didn't seem too concerned at first. But after some convincing, and the mention of the missing child years ago, they agreed to send someone out. 2 officers showed up that afternoon. I watched them walk across the street and knock on Charlie's door. No answer. They circled the house, peered through windows, and eventually entered through the back with permission from their supervisor. I waited, barely breathing. 20 minutes later, they came back out, empty-handed. "No one's inside," one of them told us. "Place looks like it hasn't been lived in for weeks. No food, no heat. Power's been shut off. You said he was just out here a few days ago?" My mom nodded slowly, confused. "Yes, he was here. They promised to file a report. They didn't dig up the yard. Not without a warrant. They left, and that was it." The next morning, the shovel was gone. Weeks passed, then months. Charlie never came back. His house was declared abandoned. A for sale sign went up in the yard by spring, but no one ever bought it. No one would, because something strange happened after Charlie vanished. From our window, we could see the spot where he always dug. The patch of grass was different, greener, softer, almost too healthy. And in the middle of it, tiny yellow flowers started to grow. No one planted them. They just appeared, and they never stopped blooming, even in the dead of winter. Aaron moved away that summer. My mom and I followed a year later, but I still think about that house, about Charlie, and about the things we bury that never really stay buried. In the summer of 2008, I moved into my first home alone. It was a small rental on the outskirts of Austin, Texas, nothing fancy. 1 bedroom, creaky floors, and beige walls that looked like they hadn't been painted in years. But it was mine. After years of roommates and dorm halls, I finally had my own space. The landlord, Mr. Keller, was a wiry man in his 60s who barely made eye contact and spoke, like every word was a chore. When I asked about the attic, since the hatch was oddly sealed shut, he just muttered, "Don't worry about that. It's just insulation space. No reason to go up there." That should have been the first red flag. The first week was uneventful. I unpacked, set up my small TV, and enjoyed the silence. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly older couples and a few empty houses. At night, crickets sang and the occasional dog barked somewhere far off. It was peaceful, until the 3rd night. I was lying in bed around midnight, scrolling through my phone when I heard it. A soft creak. It wasn't from the hallway or outside. It was directly above me. I paused, holding my breath. Then another creak. Slower this time, like a footstep on wood. But the attic was supposed to be empty. Just insulation, right? I got up and checked the ceiling hatch in the hallway. It looked the same, closed tight, undisturbed. Maybe the house was just old. Maybe it was settling. I told myself that. The next night, the sound came back. Same time, same pattern. This time I stayed awake and listened closely. There wasn't just creaking, there was shuffling, like someone moving around, adjusting weight. Then a long pause. Then another step. I told a friend at work about it the next day. He laughed it off, said I was just psyching myself out. "Old houses do that," he said. Trust me, mine used to sound like someone bowling upstairs, but his house didn't have a sealed attic. By the end of the first week, I started noticing other things. A spoon I was sure I left in the sink was suddenly in the drying rack. A granola bar I kept in the pantry was gone, but the wrapper was in the trash, even though I hadn't touched it. And then there was the smell. Faint at first, like dust and mold, but it came and went, stronger some nights, especially near the attic hatch. I sprayed air freshener, lit candles. Nothing helped. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that I was alone and overthinking things. But deep down I knew there was something up there, and whatever it was awake. By the second week, I started writing things down. What time I went to bed, what food I had in the fridge, what items I left on the counter. Not because I was obsessing, but because I was starting to doubt my own memory. That's what this house was doing to me. Little things kept disappearing. First, it was a pair of socks I'd laid out for work, then a razor from the bathroom, then a full box of cereal, not just moved, but completely gone. The trash was always in the right place. No signs of a break-in, no windows open, no unlocked doors, nothing. I changed the locks just in case. Bought a new deadbolt for the front door, but even then things kept happening. One night I came home from work and the hallway light was on. I always turned it off before leaving, always. I stood there for a long minute, just staring at it. My stomach turned cold. That night I heard the footsteps again, only this time, they moved. They didn't stay in one place like before. I heard a slow series of creaks moving from one end of the ceiling to the other, then stopping, then again in reverse. It was walking back and forth. I stood under the attic hatch, staring up, holding my breath. It was quiet. And then, tap. One single soft tap on the wood above me, like something wanted me to know it was listening too. I backed away and locked myself in my bedroom. I pushed the dresser in front of the door and sat on the floor with a baseball bat in my hand, eyes on the ceiling. I didn't sleep. The next morning I called the landlord. "Have you ever been up in the attic?" I asked. There was a pause. A long one. "No," he said. "And neither should you." Click. He hung up. At work I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about the sound, the missing items, the smell, the way the attic door always looked like it had been, touched even though it was sealed tight, dust patterns that didn't match, one tiny black scuff that hadn't been there before. That night I placed a single granola bar on the hallway table, right under the attic hatch. I took a picture of it. Then I went to bed. The next morning it was gone. No crumbs, no wrapper. Just gone. I checked the picture again. I wasn't crazy. It had been there. I stared up at the ceiling, heart pounding. I didn't know if someone or something was living above me. But whatever it wasn't just hiding. It was watching me, and it knew I was starting to notice. I hadn't planned on talking to anyone about it again. Not after how my landlord responded. Not after how my coworkers just gave me polite smiles when I hinted at what was going on. But paranoia has a way of pushing you past pride. One afternoon, I saw my neighbor across the street sitting on his porch. He was older, maybe late 60s, with a flannel shirt, white beard, and the kind of stillness you only see in men who've seen things they don't talk about. He nodded at me as I checked my mail. "Settling in all right?" he asked. I hesitated. "Yeah, mostly." He tilted his head, studying me. "Strange noises at night?" My hand froze halfway to my mailbox. I looked at him. "You hear them too?" He didn't answer right away. "Just looked at my house, no, through it." Then he said, "That place has been empty a long time. Years, I think." I told him the landlord had said nothing about that. He gave a short, dry laugh. "That man doesn't care. He's been renting that house out since I was in my 40s. Folks don't stay long. Maybe 3 months. 6 if they're stubborn." I felt a chill run through my spine. "What happened to them?" He shrugged. "They left. In a hurry. All of them. Some said it was rats. One lady swore she saw a face looking down from the vent." I felt sick. "I think someone's in the attic," I told him. "Things are missing. I hear footsteps every night." He didn't even flinch. "Don't go up there," he said flatly. I asked him why. "Because if someone's living up there," he said, "you're not just dealing with a squatter. You're dealing with someone who's willing to survive in total darkness. Someone who's gotten good at hiding. Someone who watches, listens, waits." I looked back at the attic hatch. He stood up slowly and walked back to his door. Right before going inside, he said, "If I were you, I'd sleep with the lights on. And if you start dreaming about footsteps, leave." That night I didn't sleep. The steps above my ceiling were louder than ever. And they didn't sound like pacing anymore. They sounded like crawling, deliberate, slow, like someone dragging themselves toward the hatch. And then it stopped. Right above my room, right above me. I bought the camera the next morning. Just a cheap motion-activated one from a hardware store. Nothing fancy, just something small enough to hide in the hallway, angled directly at the attic hatch. I told myself I just needed closure, that maybe, just maybe, it would capture nothing, and I could finally sleep. But part of me knew it wouldn't be that easy. I set it up that night and left the granola bar again. Same spot, same position. Then I turned off all the lights and went to bed with a kitchen knife under my pillow. I didn't sleep. The silence felt louder than the footsteps ever had. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, I heard a soft creak above my head, then another. A series of deliberate, patient movements. I held my breath, staring at the ceiling. Then silence. Morning came too slow. I rushed to the camera, hands shaking as I plugged it into my laptop. The footage loaded. Nothing for hours. Just still hallway. Then at exactly 3:12 a.m. movement. The attic hatch moved. Not a lot, just a gentle shift, like it had been nudged from the inside. Dust trickled down. Then slowly, it opened an inch. Just enough for something to see out, to listen. A hand appeared. Long, thin fingers curled around the edge of the hatch, skin pale, with black smudges under the nails. It hovered there, motionless, for at least a minute. Then the hatch lowered and a face came into view. It wasn't some kind of monster. That's what made it worse. It was a man, a dirty, exhausted man with sunken eyes and a gaunt, hollow face. He didn't blink, didn't smile, just stared down the hallway in total stillness. His eyes moved left, then right, like he was making sure no one was awake. Then he dropped down, barely making a sound. I stopped the footage. My skin went cold. He had been inside my house, walking freely, breathing my air, eating my food, watching me. I called the police. They came in under 10 minutes, guns drawn. 2 officers stormed the attic with flashlights while I waited outside, heart pounding, stomach twisted in knots. They found him, a man in his 40s, dressed in layered, rotting clothes, covered in dust and cobwebs. He had a mattress, bottles of water, food wrappers, my food, old photos he'd taken of me from inside the house, and a journal. In it were pages of notes about my routines. What time I showered, what time I left, what time I talked to myself. He'd been living above me for weeks, maybe longer. The cops took him away. One officer told me I was lucky, that most people never find out until it's too late. I didn't feel lucky. I felt exposed. Violated, watched. The house felt different after they took him. Empty, but not in a peaceful way. More like something had been ripped out violently, and its shadow was still lingering. I didn't sleep for 2 days. Every creak in the floor made me flinch. Every flicker of light felt like eyes blinking from the dark. The police gave me very little information after the arrest. The man didn't have an ID, no known address, no family, just a first name, Walter, written in the corner of his journal. They said he might have been living in abandoned homes for years, crawling between attics, hiding in insulation, surviving off what people wouldn't notice was missing. But the worst part, they didn't know how long he'd been in my house, because in his journal, the first entry about me was dated before I even moved in. He'd been there already, waiting, watching. Like the house wasn't mine, I was just the next guest. I moved out within a week, didn't pack much, left most of the furniture behind. I just needed to get away. My landlord didn't fight me on breaking the lease. I think he knew. He'd always known. I started going to therapy. My therapist called it hypervigilance trauma, the result of being stalked in your own space. I still sleep with a bat next to my bed, still check my attic once a week, even though I live in a different state now. No noises, no footprints, but I still listen, always. A few months after I moved out, Aaron, the neighbor who warned me, sent me a message. Thought you'd want to know. Cops searched the crawl space under your old house, found scraps of clothing, photos, some bones. Looks like he'd been there way longer than anyone thought. No one knows how many houses Walter lived in, how many people he watched, how many never noticed. But sometimes when I'm walking home late at night, I look up at rooftops. My eyes go straight to the vents, the dark corners, the shadowed windows just below the attic line, because I know something now. The scariest monsters aren't in movies. They don't growl. They don't chase. They wait. They watch. And they live just a few inches above your ceiling. It was early December when the house next door finally sold. I live in a quiet Pennsylvania suburb, just rows of snow-dusted rooftops, tired mailboxes and the occasional flickering porch light. Nothing ever really happens here. That's why it felt strange when the for sale sign, that had stood crooked in the neighbor's yard for nearly a decade, suddenly disappeared overnight. No moving trucks, no contractors, no renovations, just gone. The house itself had always been a bit of an eyesore. Paint peeling, shutters missing, windows covered with yellowing newspapers from another era. Kids on our block made up stories about it, said it was haunted, cursed, filled with rats or worse. But the truth was simpler. It had been abandoned. For years, unloved, forgotten. Until now, that week, the front porch light came on for the first time in as long as I could remember. Warm, steady, unnatural in how clean it looked compared to the rest of the house. But no one ever came out. No packages were delivered. No car in the driveway. Just that single, silent porch light. My daughter Emma was the first to notice something more. She's 6, bright, curious, and a little too fearless for her own good. We were walking home from her school one afternoon, when she stopped in front of the neighbor's house and stared at the attic window. "Mom," she whispered, "there's a lady up there." I followed her gaze. Nothing, just gray glass and cracked trim. I laughed it off. "It's just reflections, sweetie. Probably the sky." Emma didn't smile. She waved at me. Later that night, I glanced through our upstairs window, the one facing the neighbor's attic. It was dark, but I could just barely make out the window Emma had pointed at. For a second, I thought I saw a shimmer, like someone had passed in front of a mirror. Then it was gone. No movement, no lights. I convinced myself it was headlights from a car or maybe a street lamp flickering. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Something about that window made the air feel heavy, like the house was holding its breath. A few days later, Emma came home with a drawing from school. Typical kid stuff, scribbled lines, crayon smudges. But the figure she drew wasn't us, or her friends, or our cat. It was a tall woman in a white dress with long black hair covering half her face. The woman stood next to a large mirror, and in the mirror she was smiling. Emma wasn't. When I asked her who it was, she just shrugged and said, "She lives in the window." That night I had a dream. I was standing in the neighbor's attic alone. In front of me stood a tall mirror, dusty, cracked at the edges, taller than me. In the reflection, I wasn't alone. Something stood behind me, close, breathing. I turned and woke up. The porch light was still on, but now the attic light was too. I hadn't planned to go into that house. It was the kind of place you look at, not enter, the kind of place you warned your kids about, joked nervously about with neighbors, and then crossed the street to avoid. But after Emma's drawing, after her comment about the lady in the window, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Something didn't feel right. Then came the sound. It started 2 nights later. A soft knocking, 3 slow rhythmic taps coming from Emma's bedroom wall. Always around the same time, 2:30 in the morning. I checked her room, the hallway, the pipes, nothing. No wind. No branches. Just that knock. Tap, 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 then silence. When I asked Emma if she heard it, she nodded, calmly. "She wants me to come over." "Who?" I asked. "The mirror lady," she said. "She says she misses her daughter." That's when I stopped brushing it off. The next morning, I walked to the neighbor's house. The front door was locked, but the side gate was open. No footprints in the frost-covered ground. No signs of recent movement, but the gate creaked like it had been used. The backyard was choked with weeds, and the back door stood slightly ajar, like it had been left that way on purpose. I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick, still, the kind of silence that presses into your ears like water. The house smelled like damp wood and rusted metal. Wallpaper peeled off the walls like shedding skin. But the floors were strangely clean. Dusty, yes, but no debris, no broken glass, nothing living or dead. Just silence. I climbed the stairs. They groaned under my weight but held. At the top, I found the attic door. The handle was cold. When I pushed it open, it swung inward with a long creak, revealing a single windowless room. And in the center stood a mirror, at least 7 feet tall. Its frame was carved with strange symbols. Some looked floral, others like they didn't belong to any alphabet I knew. The glass was warped, cloudy, but not broken. I couldn't see myself clearly in it, just a faint, stretched version of my outline. Like the mirror didn't reflect what was really there. As I stepped closer, something shifted. In the corner of the mirror, where my shoulder should have ended, I saw a movement, a flicker, like someone stepping into the frame from behind me. I turned around. Nothing. But when I looked back, the shape was gone from the mirror too. I backed out of the room and left without closing the attic door. That night, Emma didn't want to sleep in her room. She said the knocking was louder, and she said the mirror lady had started whispering, but only in the reflection. The first time I saw it, I thought I was just tired. It was early, maybe 5 a.m., and I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom. The mirror above the sink was fogged up from the shower, except for a small clear patch where my face should have been, but my reflection wasn't right. It was me, but not quite. The eyes were off, too wide, too still, and the corners of my mouth twitched just slightly, like it wanted to smile before I did. I blinked, wiped the mirror, and it was gone. But the feeling stayed, like something else had looked through me. That same morning, Emma's drawings changed. She stopped drawing houses, flowers, our cat. Now it was just mirrors, pages and pages of tall, dark mirrors filled with thin women and crooked smiles. In some, the women had no eyes. In others, they were leaning out of the mirror, one hand reaching forward. In every drawing, a small girl stood in front of them. Always the same height, always with blonde curls, always Emma. I tried to hide the drawings. She'd just make more. I asked her where she got the ideas. She tells me, Emma said. The mirror lady. What does she tell you? That I belong to her. After that, I started checking every mirror in the house. I don't know what I expected, maybe cracks, maybe messages, maybe just peace of mind. But in nearly every one, I started to notice little details. A hand that wasn't mine just at the edge of the frame, a smudge that wouldn't wipe away. And one night in the living room mirror, I saw Emma walking down the hall, even though she was asleep in bed behind me. That was when I covered them all. Blankets, towels, anything I could find. It helped for about a day. Then the knocking started again. But this time it wasn't from Emma's wall. It was coming from inside our hallway mirror. 3 knocks. Then silence. And on the glass, a small child-sized handprint appeared, pressed from the inside, smudged, wet-looking. That night, Emma woke up screaming. I ran into her room, but she was standing calmly by her closet, one hand resting on the mirror I'd forgotten to cover. She looked up at me and whispered. She said I can come stay with her now. I grabbed her hand and yanked her away, heart racing. Her skin felt ice cold. I tried calling a priest, a psychic, even the realtor who sold the house next door. No one answered. The next morning, Emma didn't speak. She just stared at our living room mirror, which was now uncovered. I swear I didn't do it, but someone did. And in its reflection, our hallway was empty. But behind Emma, there was someone standing, smiling. After the mirror in the living room was uncovered, everything changed. It wasn't just the knocking anymore. The house itself felt wrong. Cold in places it shouldn't be. Warm where it should be still. Lights flickered even after I replaced the bulbs. The cat, normally fearless, refused to enter certain rooms. She hissed at corners, her fur standing on end, ears flattened like something invisible was breathing beside her. And Emma, she stopped sleeping altogether. I'd find her sitting up in bed, eyes fixed on her bedroom mirror, unblinking. When I asked what she was doing, she'd say, "I'm waiting for her." That night I watched her while she slept. Around 2 in the morning, I saw it for myself. The mirror across from her bed shimmered just slightly. Not like glass catching moonlight, but like water. The surface rippled, then went still. For a moment, I thought I saw a pale face behind the glass, too tall to be Emma, lips parted in a silent whisper. I turned on the light and it vanished. I didn't care anymore about explanations. I smashed the mirror the next morning. Glass shattered across the room, splintering into hundreds of jagged pieces. Emma screamed, not out of fear but rage. She clawed at my arm, crying, "You ruined her door!" She was going to take me tonight. I called my sister and begged her to take Emma for a few days. She didn't ask many questions, just picked her up that afternoon and promised to keep her safe. That night I was alone in the house, and I wasn't afraid. I was angry. I went next door. The abandoned house's front door was still slightly open, as if it had been waiting for me. I walked in without hesitation, climbed the stairs, and opened the attic door again. The mirror was still there, only now. It wasn't dusty. It was perfectly clean. The surface glowed faintly like it was pulsing, breathing. I stepped closer. My reflection stared back, but something was wrong. I wasn't alone. There was a woman behind me in the glass, tall, veiled in shadows, with long black hair that seemed to float rather than hang. Her hand reached for my shoulder in the reflection, but when I turned around, no one was there. Still, I felt it, a pressure, a presence. I backed out of the attic and slammed the door shut. As I did, I heard something on the other side. A knock, then another, then a whisper that slid through the crack in the door like cold smoke. "She's mine now." I ran home. When I got there, every mirror I'd covered was uncovered again. Even the one I had shattered had somehow pieced itself back together. And in each one, my reflection wasn't moving the same way I was. They all stood perfectly still, but they were smiling. I don't remember making the decision. I just remember waking up the next morning drenched in sweat, with one thought echoing in my mind like a scream. It won't stop unless I end it. I picked up Emma from my sister's that afternoon. She seemed calmer, happier even. No mention of the mirror, no mention of her. It was like taking her away from the house had broken whatever spell had settled over her, but I knew the thing wasn't finished. Not until the mirror was gone. That night I waited until just past midnight. I grabbed a gas can from the garage and crossed into the neighbor's yard, cold wind biting at my face. The porch light was still on. The attic window was glowing faintly, even though no light in the house should have worked. As I stepped inside, the smell hit me. Not dust. What? Like something had died in the walls. Years ago and just now began to breathe again. I climbed the stairs one last time. The attic door swung open like it had been expecting me. The mirror stood there, tall, waiting, glowing from within. But this time, she was visible. Not just in the reflection, she was inside the mirror. A woman with gray, cracked skin and long, dark hair that floated as if underwater. Her hands were pressed against the inside of the glass. And her face. She wasn't angry. She was smiling, like I'd finally given her what she wanted. I stepped forward, poured the gas around the mirror, and lit a match. The moment the flame touched the floor, I heard her voice, not from the mirror, but inside my head. "You can't burn glass." But it wasn't the glass I was burning. It was the door. The fire spread fast, too fast. I ran out, coughing, smoke thick behind me. By the time I got back to our driveway, the attic was engulfed. The flames reached out of the windows like claws. I stood there in the snow, holding Emma's hand, watching that cursed house crackle and collapse under its own weight. The fire department said it must have been faulty wiring. No one questioned it. We moved 2 months later. Since then, Emma hasn't spoken of the mirror lady. No more drawings, no more whispering. But sometimes, late at night, she'll stop playing and go still, like she's listening. And once, I caught her staring into the toaster's metal side, smiling. If this story kept you up tonight, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more unsettling true horror. New stories drop every week, and sometimes the scariest ones live right next door.